Hello, everybody. My name is Ryan McNeil, and this is the Builder by Day podcast. Thank you very much for tuning in. Today's episode is a follow-up to last week's episode, which was about the building process from start to finish. So today's episode is about how to evaluate a piece of land before you buy it, because that's important. Things have to be done in the correct order. And evaluating and analyzing and assessing the land after you've already purchased it is a very bad idea. So I'm going to run through this today with you and explain to everybody how I work through my process of determining which land to buy, what lots are preferred versus others. There's much that can go into it, and I'm going to run through some of these things from top to bottom, give you a sense of some of the things that you should consider before deciding which piece of land to buy. Okay, so the topic of discussion today is how to evaluate a piece of land before you buy it. And this will speak in a lot of ways to what many buyers sometimes overlook and why it then later sometimes costs them dearly. If you're thinking about building a house or investing in a property or even just buying a lot for the future, one of the most important steps you can take is knowing how to properly evaluate the land before you buy it. I've seen people fall in love with the view or privacy or the trees or the proximity to a trail that they like, only to later realize that they've brought themselves into an absolute nightmare. And that could be things from like poor drainage, no access to the services on the lot, grading issues, and one of the absolute worst things is zoning restrictions, rights of way, or easements that you were not aware of before you purchase the property. And when you become aware of them, it's too late. You already own the property. So today I'm going to walk you through the way I evaluate land step by step. And I'm going to tell you what I look for, what I avoid, and how you can avoid some of these common traps that cost many people a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of their sanity. Okay, so let's start with the big problem here. The big problem that most people run into and where they get themselves in trouble is they buy land mainly based on emotion. So they walk on a piece of land and they go, wow, look at the view, or it's so quiet and peaceful, or it reminds me of where I grew up as a kid, or whatever it might be. All of those things matter. They're all very important, and those are all good reasons to buy a parcel of land, but only after you have made sure that it can actually be developed properly and affordably in the way you want to develop it. When I walk a piece of land, I'm not thinking about the view. I'm thinking about things like how much the site work is going to cost and whether the driveway is going to be $5,000 or $25,000. Where's the foundation going to go? Can I get a foundation on this lot without rock breaking or retaining walls or importing fill? And essentially just I'm looking at the land to determine how much is it going to cost for me to service this land and get it ready to build whatever it is that I plan to build. And there are many other considerations other than just the site work, but that's sort of the first thing at top view. That's what I'm looking at when I walk on a piece of lot or I view it from the street for the first time. One thing I should mention, I guess, I like to use analogies. Anyone that's listened to my podcast in the past or anyone that knows me personally knows that I love to use analogies to describe just about everything. The analogy I'm going to use in this case, it really works well. And I actually can relate to it from personal experience because I actually used to be a lifeguard in my younger years when I was young and fit and could swim many miles. Keep this in mind. The reason I'm going to bring this analogy up now is that I'm going to reference it and probably refer back to it as I run through this episode today. So the analogy here is this. You know, you've all been to a beach before and you go to the beach and there are lifeguards on duty. And if you go to a beach, like a proper beach, like I live here in Nova Scotia, we have beaches that are on the ocean. And when you go to these beaches, there are lifeguards on duty. But the lifeguards can't watch and protect the entire beach. I mean, it could be literally miles long. So what they do is they identify an area that they have determined is safe. They have reviewed it. They know it's safe. They know people aren't going to run into things here they don't want, like a strong undertow or huge waves or, you know, any type of coral or something that might be under the surface of the water that you can't see at first glance, but could be a problem. These are the things that lifeguards, trained professionals, know to look for. Almost in every case, when you go to the beach, you will see this area identified with ropes and buoys, and the lifeguards are on duty. And what they say is, as long as you stay within these ropes and buoys, we'll keep an eye on you. But more importantly, you know you're in a safe place. We've reviewed it. And the analogy here when it comes to buying land, that safe space within the ropes and buoys that the lifeguards are looking over, that would be like buying your typical building lot from a builder and or real estate developer in a subdivision. And it's very neat and clean and tidy, and it's newly created, and you can see it very clearly, and the lot lines are cut, and you can easily identify the land, and the builder or developer has already insured all of these things, like you can get building permits. There aren't any easements or rights of way that are restrictive on the property. That doesn't mean that there aren't any easements or rights of way, but if you're in a subdivision buying a building lot, so if you're buying lot 4 whatever street from a builder, and that builder is going to build a home for you on that lot, then it's pretty safe that you're going to be okay with that lot. You're not going to run into some crazy restrictive zoning or covenant that doesn't allow you to build the home you want to build, because you're hiring a builder to build you the home on the lot that the builder is selling you. So you're basically operating within the buoys. You can think of it like that. When my children were young, I would take them to the beach. And even though I, as a young person, when I was a teenager, I was a lifeguard. I used to be the person sitting in the chair at the beach, watching everybody swim within the buoys, and also keeping an eye on the people who weren't in the buoys, even though we told them to stay within the buoys. What happens is these folks who stray outside the buoys and they get out somewhere out in the waves and sucked into an undertow, if that happens, the lifeguards are still going to go get you. And that's essentially how it works here when it comes to building lots or buying lots. Except what you have to realize is that if you swim outside the buoys when it comes to buying land, so you buy a piece of land somewhere in a rural area, some parcel of land or a lot off the side of the road, and you go it alone, no lifeguard, no professional has overseen this and has okayed it, then you are definitely taking a risk. And you might be a strong swimmer, or in this case, you might be somebody who has bought and sold real estate in the past, and you understand some things about how it works, and perhaps you know what to look for in easements and zoning and so on. I can tell you from experience, I've personally pulled strong swimmers out of the water because they ran into something that even they hadn't seen before or experienced before. And it can be really bad news. It can be catastrophic to your plans, and it can be financially crippling if you run into a situation like this and you get beyond the point of no return. So for the remainder of today's conversation, if you hear me reference back to the lifeguard beach safe buoy area, that's what I'm referring to. Let me just recap here because I interrupted myself. The first part of, as I mentioned, of buying land, the first part to be careful of is to be aware that you don't want to buy entirely based on emotion. And what I meant by that is you want to look at more than just things like the view and the proximity to, somebody you know, or family members, or trails, or the airport, or whatever that is. You want to look at more than just those emotional things, of course, views, the way it makes you feel, the trees on the property, the wildlife, whatever it is. You really want to avoid making your decision entirely on those things. Those are all excellent reasons to buy a piece of land, as long as you have confirmed all of these other things so that you don't run into problems. Make sense? So the second thing that I'm looking for when I walk onto a piece of property, and it kind of hits you in the face, it's unavoidable if you're used to looking at land, this is going to be what jumps out at you anyway, is basically the grading and topography of the lot. Okay, we're talking about the slope, whether the lot is flat or it's sloping from front to back or side to side. And for the purpose of this conversation today, let's also assume that we're referring to building lots, and let's bring that down to something feasible, like perhaps it's a 1 or 2 acre building lot. Things change when you get into large acreage parcels. If you start getting into 5 and 10 acres plus, it's an entirely different process to evaluate land like that. If you're buying 20 acres of land and you're going to build a driveway 200 feet in off the road and build a house, then really the only part of that land that matters is the area which you are going to be developing. The other back 40 acres or whatever it is that you bought are somewhat irrelevant if you have no plans for them, other than to, have the bragging rights of how much land you own, or you want to ride your ATV through your land, or you want to have chickens or whatever it might be. Although that's a good example. If you do want to have livestock, you're going to want to make sure that the zoning allows for it. But this next thing that I see when I show up to a lot and how I evaluate land is to look at the grading and the topography. The simplest way to say it is that slope is money. So what I mean by that is, if a lot is sloping in the wrong direction from what you want it to, then you're going to be into costs in order to shape the land from its natural shape to whatever shape you need it to be. And you could be looking at things there like bringing in fill or making cuts. So when I say making cuts, that basically, if you imagine the land was relatively flat and you need it to be a walkout basement in the back. So in other words, what you want is grade. You want the land to be sloping downward from front to back. But if it doesn't really do that, or if maybe it only has 4 feet of grade, but you need it to have 8 feet of grade, well then you'll be in there with a heavy machine, an excavator of some kind, and making a cut. You'll be cutting the land down lower than it is. And when you do that, you can run into other things. You're going to have drainage considerations and retaining walls. But other things you want to talk about, even if you're not making cut or bringing in fill, you want to be looking at things like where the driveway is going to be and the angles of the driveway. Is this driveway going to be steep? Right? Does this lot come in off the road and shoot straight uphill at a 30-degree angle or downhill at a 30-degree angle? And if there is some steepness, you got to think about how the driveway is going to come in. Are you going to shoot straight up or down that slope, or are you going to cut across? These are all things that an experienced builder or developer is going to look at. Also related to topography are things like drainage issues. And what I mean by that is surface water on the lot that might be moving in a direction that is going to be perhaps detrimental to where you situate the house. So if the lot is sloped a certain way and you have a lot of runoff and it's not dealt with correctly, you don't want that water running toward your home. You can get into flooded basement issues and water pooling in your yard and things of that nature. Flat lots aren't necessarily always better either. I'm not suggesting that flat is always, everything's okay as long as it's flat. On flat lots, there are plenty of other issues to be considered. Specifically, what I'm looking for is what it is that I want to do with that land is going to work with the natural flow of the land. I want to know where the water's going. I want to know if I can work with the land without fighting against it. And remember, this isn't just about buildability. That's not a word, but it's about long-term value and your satisfaction with the land, right? So there's more to it than just building the building. You also want to be able to live on this land and do whatever it is that you have planned with the land. The next thing that I'm considering when I look at a parcel of land, for the purposes of this conversation, we're really referring to the land that sits outside of the buoys. Because inside the buoys, there are professionals who have already identified that place as being safe for you to do your thing. And in this case, doing your thing is building a home. So we are referring to the land outside the buoys when we look at this and when we talk about what it is that you need to look at when reviewing the land. So the next thing I look at when reviewing any parcel of land is access to the services, or if there aren't any services at all. Does the lot have municipal water and sewer? And in many cases, for the lots that we're talking about, they're not going to have water and sewer. So you're looking at land that is going to require on-site services like wells and septics. In other words, you as a property owner or your builder, developer, whoever you hire, you're going to have to install a well and install a septic system so that you can service the land to build your home. There are other things to be considered. Things like the power and telecom lines. Are they right there at the edge of the property? Do the power lines run right across the front street frontage of your lot? Or are they, several hundred feet away on somebody else's property, coming in a private lane, and you're going to have to get an easement and deal with your neighbors and extend the lines? These things that I'm describing aren't sort of pie in the sky ideas. These are things that we deal with on a regular basis. Even just getting power from one location, wherever it ends, to your location on your lot. I've dealt with that many times over the years, and it can be a real pain. It can be a real challenge, especially if you have power lines coming in on private land, and then you need to deal with a stranger, somebody you've never met before, and get them to give you an easement to bring power to your lot because the poles are on their lot. It can get sticky, and you want to know about that before you buy the lot. Other things when it comes to lot, you're going to be thinking about whether or not you're trenching the power or services, from the pole to your home, or are you taking these lines overhead? And if you're taking them overhead, do you have trees to cut? These are all things that are going to need to be considered when you're looking at the land before you determine if it's going to be financially feasible or even feasible at all for you to build what you want to build. Same with upgrading things on the lot like culverts or ditching or, big ticket items like blasting for any services that you need to bring in, or blasting for your foundation even. This is the stuff that most people don't even think about when they're looking at this beautiful lot that they saw that has lovely views and wildlife and flowers and trees and all of those things. These are the things under the surface, literally under the surface, that you need to be thinking about so that you don't get yourself painted into a corner. This next thing that I'm going to refer to is zoning and setbacks and legal constraints. This is absolutely the number one thing that you need to be aware of, you need to look into, and you may need to engage professionals to confirm for you, what are you allowed to do with this land? What are you allowed to do? Because you can buy land, you can have all the money in the world, you can buy all the land you want, but all of the land has zoning and it has restrictions, and much of that land may have legal constraints like rights of way or easements that you have to be aware of. And money doesn't make that stuff go away. So even if you have all kinds of money, you say, hey, look, I don't care. I don't need to look at any of that stuff. I got more money than brains. I'm just going to buy land and do whatever I want with it. Well, you can do the first part. You can buy all the land you want, but you're not going to do what you want with it, because if the zoning doesn't permit you to do what you want, you're not going to be doing it, because you're not going to be able to get a building permit to do it. Or you're not going to be able to get permission from the guy next door who has an easement to cross your land. He's going to say, no, I'm not willing to let you build within the easement. Say you bought a property because it's on a lake or a river. You buy this piece of land. It has water frontage. You're all excited to build your home and then go down to your water frontage and enjoy it. But you forgot to look into it, and you realize after you buy the land that there's a right of way that cuts right through the middle of the property, and everyone in the subdivision has the legal right to travel this right of way down to this little beach area that you fell in love with. And now you realize that dozens of people at any time can help themselves to that beach because they have a legal right of way to do so. So you can think of it like this. I mean, this is how it works, but in a very simplified way. Zoning refers to what you can build, okay, what you're allowed to build. Setbacks are how far from each boundary you may need to be, or it may not even be property boundaries. It could be how far you need to be from a body of water or wetland or whatever the case may be. And then easements. Think of an easement as a restriction on the property. There is something else going on there. Oftentimes it's a utility easement. Okay, so there is a parcel of land that the power poles may be on, or future services have been identified as to go in this particular area of the land. And so you're stuck. You can't do anything with that. You can't develop in that piece of land if it's restrictive of development. Then another thing that you'll need to consider are any covenants, restrictive or protective covenants, and or sometimes referred to as homeowners association restrictions. And these also can have a huge impact on what you're allowed to do with the property and how you're allowed to live on the land. Generally speaking, covenants are in place to protect the property values of everybody in that community and to protect everyone's quiet and peaceful enjoyment of their land. Restrictive covenants and or protective covenants, they can be referred to both ways. These covenants are in place for several reasons. Normally, these covenants are in place partly to ensure that the community looks a certain way, has a certain aesthetic. So it can refer to actual building requirements, things like the type of siding that you have to use. It could even be very specific and refer to certain colors that you are permitted to use for the siding or roof shingles for your home. It certainly refers to things like what you're allowed to do with your home. Are you allowed to operate a small business? Some covenants restrict parking vehicles of a certain size in your driveway. Even though it's your driveway and it's your Winnebago, you're not allowed to park it there because the covenants don't allow for that. It can restrict things like fencing and where you can put fencing and how high it can be. And it can certainly restrict things like what you're allowed to do with your property and what you're allowed to build on your property. So all of these things need to be explored thoroughly and reviewed before you buy the land. One mistake here and your entire plan can be blocked. I've seen people buy land, they want to build a duplex, for instance, or an over-under unit, only to find out that the zoning is R1 and it only allows single unit. And so their plans are no longer any good to them. Or setbacks that leave no room for you to build the house that you want to build because the lot was 200 feet wide and you seemed like you had a lot of room, but there was a wetland on one side and you had to be 30 meters back from that. And then you had an easement on the other side. And before you know it, you're down to this little narrow strip of land. And you can build a house on it, but it can only be 30 feet wide or something like that. I've seen some crazy things that in most cases they get caught before people buy the land, but I've seen some people miss some things that have cost them dearly. The takeaway here is don't assume anything when it comes to land and the land that you're buying. Confirm everything. And if you need to reach out to professionals, surveyors, engineers, builders, developers, lawyers, realtors, whoever, then reach out to whoever those people are. Reach out to the homeowners association, call the municipality, send the property ID to your lawyer and have them look it up for you. Do whatever it is that you have to do to ensure that you are making the right decision. Another thing to look for when I'm walking the lot, when I'm walking some land, another thing that I'm looking for are any environmental red flags. So this would be things like wetlands or floodplains. are we looking at a lot where the soil is clay or is it rock? There's a big difference between those two things. You buy a lot that is in an area where it's just basically your typical clay under the surface, then that's pretty easy to work with. But you buy a lot that is bedrock under the surface, and that is not easy to work with. And I've built many, many homes on both of those situations, and rock is not your friend when it comes to developing land. These environmental red flags, they can kill a project immediately. And they can also just bleed you dry through engineering reports and mitigation work and fighting with the Department of Environment or municipality or whoever it is to try to do something with a lot that now you've purchased and you're stuck with and you're trying to make the best of. I have passed on many beautiful parcels of land because when you stand back and look at it and it's 4 acres and you realize that 3 of those acres go underwater when we get heavy rains, that's an entirely different situation than 4 acres of usable land. So these environmental concerns are something to definitely be aware of. And I guess the other thing to keep in mind here, and to come back to my analogy of the beach and the buoys and the lifeguard, is remember, if you don't do this every day, if you don't have familiarity with this, then you don't even know what you don't know. So you can very quickly get yourself into a problem where you say, hey, I bought this piece of land. I have my lawyer look it up. No rights of way, no easements. This nice, clean title. Look at it. It's full of trees. It's perfect. And then you realize that, you looked at it in August, but the next spring comes around and it's March or April, and you have all the winter runoff and rain, and the weather is entirely different than it was in August when you bought it. And what you realize is that half of that lot that you love so much, with that beautiful little river running down the side, half of your land is underwater in April. And you didn't realize that because you were there in August. Again, when you swim outside the buoys, even if you're a strong swimmer, you are taking a risk. And the stronger swimmer you are, the more you swim outside the buoys, the more comfortable you'll be with that. But even the strongest of swimmers, even those of us who have been doing it for 20 years, swimming outside the buoys, we still get stung from time to time. You still swim into an area where there are jellyfish, or you get yanked under by an undertow, or you find yourself getting tossed around in the waves more so than you would like to, and you may not come out of that unscathed. And it happens to the best of us, and it even happens to those of us who have been doing this for a long time. I have lots of examples I could give on this, and some of these things are you don't even know. Like, for instance, over the years, I've had a number of nightmare wells. And what I mean by that is I've had situations where we have built homes for folks, or model homes, whatever the case may be. We drill the well, and it might be in a community where typically the wells are 200 feet deep. But I've had scenarios where we drill wells and it's not the typical well. I'll do another episode at some point and I'll discuss specifically just wells and septics. Wells and septics are something that turn a lot of people off to the idea of an unserviced lot, or to buy land where they have to install their own well and septic. It's really nothing to be afraid of, but there are things to be aware of. And knowing what the wells are like in the area is important. For instance, I can tell you, I have built many homes in several communities where the well depths are all over the place. I'll give you an example. I built a number of homes. I built probably 7 or 8 homes on this one particular street that I can remember. And on this street, there are several wells that are 200 feet, maybe even a little less, and they have plenty of water. So we call that a good well where I come from. Of one specific example, where on the same street, 2 lots side by side, 2 typical subdivision lots, each one about an acre in size. These 2 lots side by side. One lot had a well that was 200 feet and something like 12 gallons a minute, which is a lot. It's plenty. It's all the water you'll ever need. The lot immediately next door had a well that went to 805 feet in the ground just for us to find half a gallon a minute. Those 2 lots are entirely different in their cost to service them. Like, entirely different. Tens of thousands of dollars in the difference just in the well. So imagine, from a builder's perspective, if I built the same home on those 2 lots, identical home. I build this home and I sell it for $800,000. And I build exactly the same home next door and I sell it the next day to somebody else for $800,000. My cost to build those 2 homes turnkey is tens of thousands of dollars in the difference just between those 2 lots and only because of the well. That's if everything else goes exactly the same between the 2 builds. And so for you as a homeowner, potential homeowner, or a land purchaser, you're not going to know how deep your well is going to be, but you can find the information, you can call well drillers, you can look up the reports, you can get a general idea of what the well depths are like in the area. And if you're buying a lot and it's on a street where all the wells are 500, 600, 700 feet deep, then that doesn't mean you're not going to buy the lot, but you better be prepared for a $40,000 or $50,000 bill to drill your well and install your pump and pressure tank and everything that needs to go along with it. And then hopefully you get enough water to live on. I've had other lots that I've bought over the years that have required tens of thousands of dollars in land preparation. And that could be things like retaining walls, rock breaking, bringing fill into the lot. As a matter of fact, sometimes we even have to pay to take fill out of the lot. Remember I told you sometimes flat lots aren't necessarily the best for what you're trying to do. I've had instances where we've built homes for folks, and by the time we excavate to put their foundation in the ground, we have created a lot of fill and the land is flat, so there's nowhere to lose it. There's nowhere for us to sort of push the fill off into a low spot. And so you're actually physically trucking the fill out of the land in tandem trucks. And ironically and painfully, the very next week, I could be building a house up the street and we could be trucking fill in from somewhere else. So from a builder's perspective, or from your perspective as a property owner, you could pay to bring fill in. And that's pretty common. That's quite common that you're going to pay to bring some fill into your lot. But you could also find yourself in a situation, and we have clients right now that we're building for, it's going to cost them money to truck fill out of their lot. That's just the cost of doing business for them. They knew that going into it. They wanted this specific lot for several reasons. And it's a really nice lot, but the home that they want to build doesn't match the natural grades on site. And because it doesn't match the natural grades on site, we got to manufacture the lot. We got to shape it up. And in order to do that, we have to make some cuts, and we got to pull dozens of truckloads of fill out of that lot. I've bought and built homes on many, many lots, like hundreds and hundreds of lots. And that means I have walked hundreds of lots. I'm very familiar with the land when I look at it. But even in my experience, the 20 years that I've been doing this, I have actually built homes and sold them to folks because we build and sell homes turnkey, meaning that we price the home and everything in the home and all the specs and everything that's included. We put it all together in one turnkey price. We sell the home and the land and taxes and everything included to the homeowner. I have built homes on unserviced lots. And ultimately, at the end of the day, when the project was finished and it closed, the homeowners may have purchased this home for $500,000, let's say. And that is the price that they pay when it's all said and done. At the end, it's $500,000 because that's what we agreed to. But I've had instances where I have lost money building the home because we ran into issues with the land. So these are some of the things that you need to consider when you're looking at buying a parcel of land, trying to determine if it is the right parcel of land for you. And there is much, much more to consider, and it's a very long conversation. The takeaway from here is that land will ultimately make or break your project. A good lot sets you up for a smooth build, and a bad lot becomes a black hole. It can drain the energy from your project. It can drain you financially. It can just ruin even the best designed homes and the best plans and the best vision that you came up with. Before you buy any land, you should walk that land with somebody who knows what they're looking at. Ask the right questions, run the numbers, do the math, do the research, make the calls, engage whichever professionals you figure you need. And if you don't know what you're looking for, then reach out to somebody who does. I provide this service for folks that we are building for. Once we get to a point that we know what we're going to build for them and we're pretty confident that they're going to move forward, if they're buying a lot that is not in one of our developments, then I will go look at this land, because we're not going to put together a full building contract and go through the entire design process only to then find out that before I even get out of the truck, I look at it and go, this is not going to work. So you want to engage a professional, and specifically, honestly, you want to engage a contractor or builder who knows how to walk land and look at it and knows what to look for. The other person or type of person that you may want to engage if you don't have a builder, or if you're not going to be hiring a builder, say you're going to build your own home, or you're not going to do anything right now, but you're just thinking about buying some land to have it for later. And when later comes, you're going to do it yourself. You're just going to hire the different tradespeople and go at it. If that's the case, then if you're not going to engage a builder, the person you'd want to engage would be an excavation contractor of some kind, who also, again, is familiar with what to look for. But that excavation contractor, in fairness, is probably not going to have much to say about easements and rights of way and setbacks and zoning or any of those things, but they will likely know what to physically look for on the site. Things like signs of bedrock outcrop or wetlands or grade issues, etc. So that covers today's episode. I hope you enjoy it. If you haven't already done so, please like and subscribe. If you have any questions or comment, please go ahead and drop that down below and I will do my best to answer that. And if you're somebody who is considering building a home and you are perhaps trying to decide what parcel of land to buy, or you're not sure how that process works or how to evaluate the land, or you want some help with that, that is all part of the process for us here at Stonewater Homes when we build for our clients. So don't get too overwhelmed by that. But again, know that my absolute number one recommendation is to engage the professionals who have the experience to help you evaluate the land correctly to hopefully avoid as much of, if not all of, the problems that you may run into. Thanks very much for listening today, folks. I hope you enjoyed the episode. See you next time.